In this video, we'll learn to create applique using the Sketch-A-Stitch software. And so to get started, I'll click on the sketchbook tool to turn on the tool and uncover the little blue sketchbook widget. And I'll click on the brush selector to see all the different brushes, and then I'll choose the applique brush. Now that I've got applique selected, I can further enhance. First of all, I can draw a shape, or I can select from pre-programmed shapes like stars and hearts and whatnot. And I can also decide quickly how wide will the border of my applique be, and what density will the stitching for my applique border be. But when I'm happy with those settings, I simply click and drag to make the heart shape. And when I first click, I set down the heart, and now I can keep dragging to decide how big it will be and on what orientation it shall be. And so when you're happy, you let go. Now you've created a shape that's an applique. And if I like, I could keep clicking and dragging to keep making applique hearts. And you can have as many as you want. If you want to change their color, come down to the bottom and select a new color and then click and drag to create a new colored heart. If you want to change the colors of each individual color in your applique, you can further select them over on the left. What I'm going to do is simplify our design a little bit by selecting and removing the second two appliques and just having one on my screen. And notice that I can select the first color, which is blue, the second color, which is red, and the third color, which is green. And I can change the color of those by clicking down at the bottom on the new color in the color palette. And so I can change the last color to be red, and then maybe I'd like to make the second color to be something more contrasting like blue. And then if I'm going to do that, maybe the first one needed to be green. And so it's really entirely up to you what color they are. Oops, I didn't mean to create a new one. Undo. Let's just see the slow redraw. So it shows the run stitch, machine stops, another run stitch, then the machine stops, and now the cover stitch. And so this is generally how an applique stitches out. You're meant to sew the first run stitch, then cover the heart with a piece of fabric, and then sew the second run stitch, and then trim around that fabric to remove the excess, and then turn it, and then sew that cover stitch. And so when I select this shape, I have properties that relate to doing an applique. And the first choice is, what kind of cover stitch do you want? A satin edge, or a blanket edge, or a motif edge? Now with the satin edge, you get like all of the other steel stitches. You get a zigzag that goes back and forth. You can control how wide it is with the width here. I'll make it from 3 to 4, and that will make it wider. And I can change the density. It's decimal 4. If I make it decimal 3, it'll have more stitching, and if I make it decimal 7 or 8, it'll have more distance in between. And again, this is an option to inset, as we may have looked at in a previous video, the offset. So right now the border is 50% on the inside and 50% on the outside, but you can change that inset to be, for example, 30%, which will push more of the border to the outside. So now if let's say you had thick fabric and your border wasn't covering it, that's a solution to that. Or maybe it's the opposite and you had very delicate fabric and you wanted to move it more towards the inside. Or maybe just straight down the middle makes the most sense. For the average applique, that's where we go, halfway either way. Do you want to include the placement line, the tack down, or the finish? And so if you're, for example, wanting to do a raw edge applique, you could just simply choose to leave the finish off altogether and not have that border, and then trim and let it kind of be raw edge like that, or include a finish and change it to a blanket edge and give it a much more handmade look to your design. And once you choose blanket edge, now the properties will relate to the settings of this blanket stitch. So I guess the width of it, so how long are those stitches, and the density, how far apart are they? And so they're 3.5. If you make that 4, they'll be further apart, and it's 4 long now. If you make it 3, it'll make them shorter. And so this is how you always take control of the shapes. You select them, and you interact with the properties box. When you have an applique, you can actually put a fabric to display on your screen. Notice the button that says fabric, and when you select that button, you're given an option box for fabric types. And so these fabric types can be clicked on and just say okay, and now that becomes the color on your screen. It doesn't change the way this design will actually stitch out. It just simply allows you to visualize that that area is an applique and has some fabric in it, and allows you to choose a color that seems to match your design. And so this video is about creating applique using the Sketch-A-Stitch software.